all in. I'm like veins popping in my forehead. Like I'm going. And they had the same look on their face. So finally, I'm like, yeah, what's up? Like, what? Like, why aren't you responding? And they said, well, the woman.
If you actually took time to learn about how incredible you were, nothing would ever stop you.
So when I realized she was talking, I was like, oh, this isn't a conversation where I need to give advice. She isn't asking for that. This isn't a seeking advice. So now if I would have started to give advice or something, we could have then butted heads right there. Because I'm looking at just do 1, 2, 3, 4 as practical, and that's not the space that person is looking from. So I've started to notice that in communications with people where I'll sit and think, okay, what are they? Are
Well,
they?
well, hold on a second. Break it down for me real quick because I remember you told me about the book. I haven't read the book,
Yeah,
but someone. I mean, I'm gonna buy the book because this is the second time you're bringing it up.
yeah, yeah.
But just foundationally, what are the different communications styles? You said
Uh,
emotional, practical.
Then the other one, I haven't really read that far into the book yet, but the other one is like who we are. But so far in the book, so far the one that you talk about the most are emotional and practical. So in the first part of the book, they talk about this guy who was working for the CIA. He was working for the CIA. He was in the like the Middle East, and he wanted to. It comes out that he wanted to be the CIA because he wanted to feel important, have value, these kind of things. So he met a young lady over there in the Middle East, and he told her first he worked for like some some company. I don't know what they were selling, just like an average company. And so they went out a few times. So eventually, he told her that he was a CIA agent and that he was trying to recruit her, because with his once he told his job that he had a potential person, they had already imagine he told his manager something, and they told the vice president. So it was kind of like, oh yeah, you better come back with this person. And so now the pressure's on him. So the first time he spoke to her, he just spoke in. Once he dropped that bomb on her, she was like, "No, like you trying to get me killed." Even though she didn't like the things that were going on in their country, her country, etc. Because of the way he, came about
Communicated. Uh huh.
communicated, it threw her off. It was bad. She didn't want to talk to him. So eventually, the last time they had met, essentially he was about to get fired if he didn't get her. So he convinced her to go out to dinner one more time. And they go out to dinner, and he's essentially like, "Hey man, he just had an emotional conversation there, naturally. It wasn't on purpose. He was pretty much like, you know, long story short, I told him about you. They said I had to bring back, like, I did this book, I did this job for this, that, and third. I suck at it. I just wanted to have some value. I thought I was doing the right thing. But he was just being honest, his honest self. And because he did that, that connected with the space that she was in. And so then they were able to, and eventually she was like, I'm brave enough to do this. I could do it. I want to help you guys. And she wound up being one of the best like spies for the U.S. That's the real story.
Right.
That part is based on the real story.
Okay.
Uh, and then another one in the story that I like was there was a case of a guy who was like a felon or something, and he saw this job posting that said pretty much, if you want to be a security guard, you gotta go here, you gotta get a gun, da da da, come over here, register, and get the job. So he think he's doing something good. So he goes, buys his gun, locks it away, puts it in his house. So when he went, I think, to like go talk about the job, uh, they pretty much asked him like, "Yeah, do you have a gun?" He's like, "Yeah, I bought one. It's in the room or whatever," paraphrasing. And so they ran his name, just do a search, and they saw that he was a felon, which you can't.
Have a gun.
So the guy's like, the officer was like, "Hey, do you have that gun?" He was like, "Oh yeah, it's in the house out there." He said, "Can you bring it to us?" So they brought it to him. As soon as they brought it to him, they locked him up.
Wow. Yeah.
So when they locked him up and he went to court, they had the jurors, and pretty much they had like a 3 question sheet that pretty much said, did he have a gun? Like it was 3 questions that literally was easy to say guilty, right? And he was going to go away for a long time. So you had a bunch of jurors in there, but you had this one who was a quote unquote super communicator. So he didn't speak out of the gate. He let everyone else speak. He saw everyone else's stance. So originally, long story short, he was able to communicate in a way that they eventually say he was not guilty, but he had to understand what everyone was in the communication style or what they were looking for in that. So you had some people. You had one guy who was what do you call it? He was an fire marshal or something, and he's very policy driven and strict driven. Like that was his whole stance. But of course, he didn't have the words to say that until this guy found a way to get him to say what his true feelings were. So his true feelings were, it really was nothing per se against the guy, but he just felt like rules and things were needed, because if not, then say we let this guy go and he go hurt someone, etc. So if we don't enforce rules and we just let things go, then anything can happen. And so when the guy realized that, he spun the conversation a little different. Was like, you know what? I actually agree with you. He said, but here's the thing: we're here debating and focused on this guy who clearly bought a gun, put it up in the shelf, didn't have no plan of using it or anything. When there's people out here that are doing a lot with it, we could be focused. To your point about safety, so we shouldn't be focused on this person. This doesn't look like a person that was trying to break the rules. This person doesn't even come across as that, and he stated it from that standpoint. And then that guy was able to come around. So it's part of it is about meeting people where they are, but just knowing what conversation to have.
Isn't that deep? That had that guy not been what you call a super communicator, that other guy goes to jail.
Oh, easily. The vote was like 9 to it was something crazy at first. It was not in his favor at all. It was not in his favor. It was like an educator who was, at first she was reserved, because you know how educators are empathetic a little bit, like, how do we know he could comprehend that was like that? And so she was from that standpoint, and someone else was from another standpoint, but everyone else was like guilty at first. And he was like the strong-minded person of guilty. So once the guy was able to communicate and figure out what everyone was, because essentially when he realized that everybody had their reservations for different reasons. So if that's your reasoning and I'm talking about this or from this standpoint, then I can't meet you where you are. But if I realize your question is more about, or you're more about like safety, gun safety or something, and then I address it from there, that's a place we can go. If yours is more assault based and I'll address it from there, we can move forward. So it's a good book though.
Obviously I work with a lot of people, and one of the things you begin to realize is not what you say, is what they hear. And when you have a lot of different personalities, it's just interesting, because I can have the intention to fully know what I mean to say, and I can say the same exact words to 4 or 5 different people, and they all hear 4 or 5 totally different things in what I just said. And when you talk about being a super communicator, I mean, going about the game within a game, man, if you have that ability, if you have that ability to, and you were just doing it when you were talking at the beginning, how like you were having that conversation and you like had a thought where you paused. That's powerful. That's a powerful pause to be able to say, okay, what conversation are we having right now? Is this an emotional conversation? Is this a logical conversation? Is this you know what I mean? Like that. The fact that you read the book, 1, is impressive, but reading the book is impressive. But number 2, to have the presence of mind, because when the emotions are going and you can start to feel yourself getting hyped, to be able to just hit the pause button and say, okay, what's happening here right now? I don't want to say a lot of people don't have the ability to do that, because everyone has the ability to do that. But you've sold me. I'm getting that book and I'm reading that book, because
get the audio. Start with the book. It's on Audible too. So
is it? I got a trip coming up. So I'll listen to it while I'm traveling.
You'll like. I know you'll like it, because I like. It's like psychology and stuff. But it's you don't think of that stuff like that. You're like, wait, this is but then it makes sense when you're like, wait, but you're like, but this make a lot of sense. You're like, it's crazy. It makes sense like this, because you
have experience.
You never experienced, but it makes a ton of sense when you read the book. It's a great book. It's a great book.
I remember this a buddy of mine in high school and his girlfriend. They were great people, but you're flashing me back right now because she'd always say, "I love him, but he doesn't listen to me." And now, as you're sitting there talking, I'm wondering, was he not listening to you, or you wanted him to process that conversation? Like, you were having the emotional conversation, he's being logical, or vice versa, whatever that is in that moment. How many divorces would have been not happened if people had read that book? Or people getting fired? Or I'm excited to read this. I'm excited to listen to this book.
Well, I tell you what, it wouldn't be 100% because some of it's still gonna happen regardless.
Yeah, I mean, of course, of course.
It would definitely, solve some issues and things like that. It'll definitely solve some issues if you understand, become self aware of like a book like that.
So, how to be a super communicator is number one. Learn about what super communication is, and then give yourself the ability. Train yourself to have the ability to pause and to think, what conversation are we having right now? And then to be able to go into the communication with that person in the conversation that they're in. Not in the conversation, like you said, when you're talking to your mom, you realize what she was saying and what you were about to say, and you stopped yourself and you danced in her world. I like it.
But here's the thing too: when you dance in someone else's world, like let's say if you were more in a, because every conversation isn't necessarily just practical, just emotional. Some conversations are both at different points. So no, for real. Like you
I
talk about,
believe you.
it's
I'm
like,
laughing.
here
Flashbacks.
you are in that conversation.
Yeah.
So when you're talking to somebody, you have to figure out, okay, not only what part of this conversation are we necessarily in, but let's say if the standpoint you're trying to do is give someone practical advice, you'd have to know how to meet them emotionally. It was an example of that. It was a doctor who I think, let's say the cancer was like, I think colon cancer or something like that, one of those cancers. Essentially, he would tell his patients that you don't need surgery. Saying if you're older in age, the thought is you die from natural causes before you die from the cancer. So no need to go through all this chemotherapy, the radiation and stuff like that. Let's just do active surveillance. So his thought was, if I tell people they don't need surgery, just do active surveillance, they're gonna be happy. Like that, like who wants to get cut? But he was like, what he noticed was almost a lot of times when he went to people and said that, they still decided to do surgery. And it blew his mind. He didn't understand. Like, he's like, well, I don't get it. I'm telling them not to. This makes no sense. So he realized he was the problem in some form of his communication. So when he switched up his communication style, instead of just talking about, hey, these are the results, this is what I suggest, he started to say things like, hey, what does this diagnosis mean to you? And so then when the person started talking, oh, this means they'll start to just speak of what they'll start to say how they feel. And now that lets you know where you need to go from here. So they would say things like, someone was like, man, let's say something like, my parent died from this situation, and man, it just feel crazy if I leave early that, my kids are coming up in this crazy world. Who's going to guide them? Or, I just don't want to look like the weak link telling someone I have cancer. Now they feel like I'm weak and I'm not able enough. So once they express themselves, where to have the conversation. So, quote unquote, someone else is having an emotional conversation in that regard. That's typically when you see now someone else come in like the other person, where they relate to them from an emotional space, because that's where the conversation wanted to go. Where, let's say if you had your own situation that was different, like, man, I totally feel you on that. Like, I lost my pops when I was young. Now y'all connected. Now you can give practical advice. Now you can be like, all right, but if I could just make a suggestion for you, I think we should do this, this, and this. These are some of the research that we've showed, because you didn't just come in throwing numbers, because that's not where they were in the conversation they had it. But once you connected where they were in that emotional space, now you can present information, because they will hear it now. They will hear it differently. Before, they weren't going to hear that. Like, none of that stuff mattered while they're thinking like, man, I don't want to feel weak. This happened to my family. This happened to my parents, or that. They're thinking about that. So you talking these numbers, they're not listening. But when you met them where they need to be met to a degree, now they can hear, because now emotional, you showed them that you care. So now they can meet you there, and they're more receptive to that.
Long ago, I had this moment with someone that I work with where I was giving them some coaching on some stuff, and I didn't know that they were like having like a family member. I think it was not their biological mom, but the lady who's like their mom who raised them was really, really sick. And I'm having this conversation, and I'm like, trying to encourage or motivate, all this stuff. And they have this kind of glazed look on their face. And so I'm trying to go harder, because I'm like, okay, they're not getting it. So now I'm going like, I'm level 1 to like 15. And they had this glazed look on their face. And so now I'm going harder. Now I'm on level 30, and I'm on level 45. And I probably was talking, and this is like, it's like, I don't know, like 20 years ago or something.
Right.
I was all in. I'm like veins popping in my forehead. Like, I'm going. And they had the same look on their face. So finally I'm like, yeah, what's up? Like, what? Like, why aren't you responding? And they said, well, the woman who raised me is dying. And man, you want to talk about feeling crazy? I'm sitting here, I'm looking at them, and it's, what do you say? So I'm like, oh my, I'm so sorry, and this whole thing. But really, what I took from that was, I never stopped to think about what the other person was thinking about before I said what I was saying. And it's like when you're trying to get someone to get the point, but you don't know where they're coming from, like what you're talking about in that moment. I literally talked for like 40 minutes before they said anything. I feel crazy, because I could have found that out within the first 30 seconds. I could have picked up, like, they're not responding at all to what I'm talking about. And I made the decision, man, that day that I would be conscious of people and not just come to people and have like a fix. Here's the point I'm trying to make, but I'm like try and be aware of where people are. But as you're sitting there talking, I'm thinking about conversations that went left, that had I had this information to pause and think real time, I'm going to listen to the book, because I'm going to listen to the book. But the most powerful part of this was when you paused real time and thought about, where is this conversation going right now, and to be able to adjust to make it an effective. Because if you're talking and nobody's getting what you're talking about, because it was like, what's the point? The most powerful thing I got on top of the concept was the power of that pause.
Yeah.
That pause is powerful.
After reading the book, you're always thinking like that now, to a degree. Like, it was a young lady I was dealing with, and she called me one day after work, right? She called me one day after work. And she like venting about work. Usually, my friends or people, they call me for advice. She's venting about work. But I realized in the moment, I was like, oh, she just needs to say what's on her mind. I don't need to give a lick of advice. The reason I knew I didn't need to give a lick of advice, because as I was listening, I tried to be funny. the stuff she was talking about don't sound like it needed. It seemed like the advice would be obvious, and or she knew what to do. Like it
Yeah.
said, like I know you know what to do. I just feel like you ever had somebody where they complain, they super frustrated about something, and you just hearing everything, and then like she's out doing things, and then she like randomly got mad at somebody that was out there, like move you in my way, all this stuff, and I was like, yeah, you just need to vent what's going on. So I'm like, it's a lot going on. You're just trying to say what you need to say, get the emotion off you. This is just your outlet right now. So I understand what space I need to occupy. So I'll just occupy that and look at it no more than that, where it's like you're asking me what would I do? Because if that was the case, you're gonna ask me to a degree, like what would I do? Or you'll formulate the conversation a little bit different. But in this space, in this time, what you need occupied is just somebody on the phone and you're venting. Cool. That's all.
I'm laughing because I'm thinking about one of my mentors. He always says it'll work itself out. So I get on the phone with him and I'm hot, hotter than Mississippi, fish grease, hot. I'm hot. I'm mad. This isn't working. That's not working. He's just sitting there listening. And I'm going and I'm going and I'm going, I'm going, I'm going, I'm going, I'm going, I'm going. And he's like, so how do you feel about that? I'm like, yeah. And no. And then he's like, okay, what about how do you feel about that? And then and I'm going. I'm like, yeah. And at the end he says, yeah, it'll all work out. Like, what? But you know, by the time I got to the point of it'll all work out, I was so tired of talking about it that he just did what he was supposed to do. He recognized real time what I needed and just let me do it.
That's
I don't
why
know if you read the book, but that's powerful.
that's why he kept asking you, what do you think about that? Because
Correct.
you're unpacking everything.
Correct.
Yeah.
Just that. I just let it all out. 15 minutes later,
Yeah.
conversation's done.
Yeah.
But it's still 15 minutes, but the conversation's done. And that is the difference that, man, yeah, I'm going to enjoy this. Thanks, Jamel. I appreciate it. Good looking out.
Actually took time to learn about how incredible you were, nothing would ever stop you. See, the definition of sight is the faculty or power of seeing.